you're welcome, I guess. Like I care. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I am drinking a hibiscus La-CROY because I'm going to be reviewing Hyperion. Look, they even match. Like, even the... This was actually an accident. I just thought it was kind of funny that I grabbed this out of the fridge, and then I'm like, actually, the cover is kind of like... it's a coincidence. Anyway, so I'm reviewing Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which is a sci-fi that I would hesitate to put into the classic realm yet, because I think it came out in 1989, which to me is like right in the periphery, because I tend to consider classic sci-fi anything that came out kind of like before I was born, which was 1985. So 89 is kind of in the middle. It still has that kind of classic sci-fi feel to it, but it also has a lot of modern stuff to it. I have seen several booktubers talk about this novel, so I decided to give it a shot. Given I got most of my classic sci-fi or sci-fi in general from my dad when I was younger, he must not have owned this one, or maybe he didn't like it. I have to ask him. Probably more likely the former. I mean, you can't own every book in the world, though, you know, you can try. I guess back to like the whole classics thing. Do you guys think this is a classic sci-fi? Let me know in the comments, because I'm curious as to like how you define classic sci-fi. I know everyone does it differently, so I find that really fun. Just like I like hearing everyone's birth stories. It's interesting because they're always different. So I guess I'm not going to do a deep dive on this book because you know how much everyone loves those. So, but I'm still going to talk in depth about some of the themes and some of the things. It's just an interesting one to review because it's got such a weird structure that it's kind of hard to do a dive on it without making this 2 hours long. So I'm also not going to list off all the tech in this book because there's way too much and some of it's way too complex in that I don't think I have the space or the time or anyone has the interest in me explaining it when you can just read the book and get a better understanding, or go on the Hyperion Wikipedia page if you really want to. Anyway, so I understand now why Hyperion is such a popular book. Simmons has created an immensely detailed world build that feels real and realistic, and on top of that, given us like a genre-blending mishmash of stories that serves to broaden and expand on this universe further. Almost everything you want from sci-fi is included. There's aliens and time travel and AI and robots and space marines and spaceships and colonized worlds. Anyway, so what is it about? I'm going to read you the back cover. On the world called Hyperion, beyond the law of the hegemony of man, there waits the creature called the Shrike. There are those who worship it, there are those who fear it, and there are those who have vowed to destroy it. In the valley of the time tombs, where huge brooding structures move backwards through time, the Shrike waits for them all. On the eve of Armageddon, with the entire galaxy at war, 7 pilgrims set forth on a final voyage to Hyperion, seeking the answers to the unsolved riddles of their lives. Each carries a desperate hope and a terrible secret, and one may hold the fate of humanity in their hands. A stunning tour de force, blah, 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 blah. So I assumed Hyperion was a reference to Keats's poem before starting it, and then seeing that there is a city called Keats on Hyperion, it validated my assumptions. Now, I've not read Hyperion, the epic poem, though I know of it. You know, my exposure to Keats was more Ode to a Grecian Urn kind of deal, the shorter stuff. I'm also more of a Shelley fan myself, or I love W.H. Auden and T.S. Eliot, and I love Afro-Ben. So I like a whole range of poetry, but I'm not super into Keats. I do know that Hyperion, the poem, deals with, and I can never say the word, the Titanomachia, and tells the story of the Titans after the Olympians basically kick their asses. As such, I'm assuming each character in the novel ties to a Titan. I kind of want to read the poem now to see, because I like making these kind of connections. But you don't need to know the poem to enjoy the book. You don't even need to have known there was a poem to enjoy the book. I'm sure there are allusions there, because, like, for example, I can think of one like Minetta, I'm pretty sure, is from from what I remember from university when we touched briefly on Hyperion, the poem. I think was a character. Anyway, it's a character in this book as well, but I don't remember what her deal was and how she relates to the one in the book. But you don't need those kind of metatextual references to understand the story of Hyperion, the book. Just saying. I just think it's interesting. I love actually when people base modern books on old literature. I just special poems. I just love that. So like for example, like The Dark Tower, you know, was based on the Song of Roland, which I have actually somewhere over on my other shelf, that my non-sci-fi shelf. Anyway, I'm talking about too much about this. So let's get into the actual review of Hyperion. The world building in this novel is fantastic, and without a doubt, the best part of the novel. It's so immense, I can't even begin to explain it all to you. The charts that Simons must have used to keep it in order, I can't even imagine. So props to him for creating such an immense world. His writing style, I really enjoyed. It's a perfect balance between stylistic and literary almost, because he has lots of clarity and he also has concise descriptions. The book's full of allusions, not to just Keats, but other literary texts. It's a very intelligent and well-devised book that's so impressively wrought. I really enjoyed reading it just for the sake of reading it, not even so much the story. I will say, I wasn't particularly fond of the way the backstories were imparted. It felt very info dumpy to me to have everyone kind of tell their little story in this neat little bundle. Now, I'm not saying I didn't like these stories, that they were, or I thought they were boring or something or poorly written, but we don't get to see the characters interact with one another too much, which doesn't make them feel like a cohesive unit. Well, Silenus, is that how you say it? Had some great lines. I would have liked to see the group cohere a bit more. You know, I would have liked to see their journey grow as a group, because you don't really get that. But that's just my preference as well. I'm very fond of character-driven stories. So for me, when a group of characters aren't interacting as much as I assumed, I get a little bit like, aw. And anyway, I don't even think the book is like wrong in doing it the way it did, of course. In fact, I'm not sure how he could have revealed their backstories in the detail and depth that he did without this structure. The focus of the book, I would argue, you know, is not so much the people as much as how they are linked together via the Shrike and Hyperion. It's like their backstories are what tie them together, not themselves. So yeah, while I'm saying that it wasn't my preference to have it done that way, in that I like a different kind of story, I did understand why it was done that way, and I think it's the only way you could have done it. So each story is different, not only because it focuses on one character, but the style is slightly different based on the genre. So we have a sci-fi action with space marines versus a detective story versus an almost literary fiction. You know, the subgenres say as much about the characters as their personalities do, which was an interesting way to do it. So I'm going to get into the characters now. I'm going to talk about all of them in detail as it pertains to their kind of mini story. So there are spoilers here, though really I'm pretty sure most people that are watching this video have read Hyperion and are probably here to see if I'm going to tear it apart, which I am not. So you're welcome, I guess. Like I care. So the first story we get is about Hoyt the Priest. His story is very interesting, but we don't learn a lot about him, more so the other priest, Duray, as this section was an epistolary novel in journal form about the older priest. We understand why Hoyt is doing what he's doing, but we don't really get to know him, which is fine. I mean, the thing that's brought him here is someone else. It's not really about him. Though it would have been more interesting to learn a bit more about his story. I did like the idea that the Roman Catholic Church has dwindled to like a small population of people. I just find that kind of fascinating, because I don't think, given the influence and sway and money that the Catholic Church brings in, that would happen. The story itself had a very kind of Heart of Darkness explorer aspect to it, because of kind of the colonialism aspects and kind of how Duray seems to think that he's better than the people that he's the people on Hyperion. I kind of got that from him, but I mean, he technically is kind of a missionary, so maybe that's where that came from. I did think that there was a bit of a critique on this approach to other cultures in his in his story. Do I think he deserved what happened to him at the end? No, but that was crazy. But yeah, the ending of this section was killer. It was the whole thing was so creepy. It was almost a horror story in a way, which I thought was really, really interesting and fascinating. The next person that we focused on was Femin Kassad, who's a space soldier who had these kind of weird, intimate encounters with this woman throughout his training and his life, only to find out that she was the Shrike the whole time. I think that's what happened. She was like, either she was working with him, but at one point she like transforms into him. So I was like, okay, whatever. I don't really know what's going on here. The story includes a lot of hyperbolic treatment of sex and women's bodies, but I honestly think he was writing in the genre at the time, because if you read space marine, like military science fiction from the 80s, there's a lot of that. Like, if you have a female character, she's usually sexualized quite heavily, even if she is a soldier. So I think that he actually, because of the way that other female characters are treated in the book, I think he was playing to the genre, and I think that's quite clever, and I liked it. I mean, there are lines like, Moneda's breasts caught and bent the light. Her nipples rose like small splashes on a mirrored pond. I died. What does that mean? What does that mean? But that's the kind of crap you get in like military sci-fi from the 70s and 80s. I do like the genre. I just, yeah, it does have a lot of these kind of like silly moments about women. Anyway, Moneda's treatment and trying to figure out her deal was kind of annoying until you get to the twist, and then you're like, oh. The story also gave me my most favorite line of all time in any book ever, and it's metal teeth click shut in a steel vagina, missing his glands by a moist millimeter. I read it like 50 times. I wrote it into my review and I still laugh. Maybe I'm like a child, but I think it's pretty funny. I mean, I shouldn't laugh because the Shrike pretending to be someone he's not and then having sex with someone is a form of sexual assault, but that description is so amazing. Like, it kind of killed the tension though, because like how could that line not kill any tension? Like, I was just like Anyway, apparently I just need to stop laughing at silly things, but whatever. The next story was Silenus, is that how you say his name? I don't know. His story was kind of convoluted, but it actually suited his character because he's kind of a crazy person. He's from Earth, but he was in Cairo for years. He worked his way up to becoming this poet, and then he went to live on Hyperion with this sad King Billy guy who burned Silenus' manuscript because the Shrike was Silenus' muse. It's a lot more complicated than that. I'm not going to explain in detail because chances are you've already read this book, you know what I'm talking about. So my only thing about this is Silenus, you know, that's why you don't be like a hipster about your writing and use a laptop, man. Like, who uses, like, it's the future. Why is he using paper? Anyway, the next story was the most heartbreaking thing I think I've read in a long time. So this was Sol Weintraub's tale about his daughter and her aging backwards. It was honestly so compelling and so sad. There is some religious reference going on with the story that I don't know anything about, but I didn't need that to understand the depth of Sol and his wife's devastation. Like, I think I actually teared up at one point because as someone who has kids, you know, that just sounds terrible. And the way that it worked too, like, this is terrible. So the only woman main character is Braun Lamia, and of course I liked her right away. Her description was not hypersexualized, which was wonderful, because as soon as I saw that there was like one woman out of 7, I was like, oh great. But she's fully fleshed out, she has sexual agency, and she's described as strong above all else. I'm going to read it to you. A former citizen of the 1.3G world of Lucis, Braun Lamia was no taller than the poet 2 chairs to her right, but even her loose corduroy ship suit did not conceal the heavy layers of muscle on her compact form. Black curls reached to her shoulders, her eyebrows were 2 dark lines dabbed horizontally across a wide brow, and her nose was solid and sharp, intensifying the aquiline quality of her state. Lamia's mouth was wide and expressive to the point of being sensuous, curled slightly at the corners in a slight smile which might be cruel or merely playful. The woman's dark eyes seemed to dare the observer to discover which was the case. It occurred to the consul that Braun Lamia might well be considered beautiful. And I think that's the difference between this and the whole nipples breaking the water thing, and that's the fact that, while of course you can say that someone's attractive, but that's not the only thing about her. There's other aspects to her form that are interesting. It's not just that she inspires someone to, you know, get all horny. So her story reminded me a little bit of Fault 4's Valentine, the synth, but where she's the detective. So I mean, that was based on noir, and this is a very noir inspired story. I loved how it flipped the gender of the typical femme fatale description in old detective stories. Usually, you know, it was like, the dame was gorgeous with long legs and an even longer cigarette. She was dangerous but also fragile. Something told me I was the only one who could help her. Anyway, I will say the second half of her story wasn't that interesting to me. AI integration and like going into like tech and stuff like that isn't my favorite subgenre of science fiction. But when she fights a bunch of dudes stark naked, I was like, damn, you are the best. I hope they put that in the show or movie. You know, I wonder who would play her. I don't usually like think about that kind of thing, but I'm curious. I'm like, who would they pick? Speaking of women, despite Braun being the only female character, there are a lot of minor female characters who have purpose to the plot. We have Tyrina, the publisher, who I liked, Mynea Gladstone, who's basically the leader of all the worlds, or the hegemony worlds anyway, Sol's wife, Sarai, I'm not sure how you say her name, Rachel herself, and several other random doctors and etc. I mean, good job, Simmons, you raised the bar. I did think it was dated that only the Outers, you know, they remind me of the Belters from The Expanse, had female soldiers, but whatever. I mean, honestly, like, other than that, I was like, pretty pretty good having a lot of women in the background and in military positions and stuff. So yeah, I was very, very, very happy with that. The last story was the Consuls, but also not the Consuls. So he tells the story of this guy, Marin, and his girlfriend Siri. Not the Apple product, I'm assuming. Maybe Siri from Apple. That's that thing you talk to, right? Maybe they named that after this. I don't know. Anyway, Marin and Siri were not only denied a life together due to time dilation, but this device called a Farcaster, it's kind of like a portal, I think, was to be built on her world that would allow tourists to visit and basically destroy it. So the Consul story explains the reason behind why the time tombs opened and the strike came out. It was deliberate revenge against the hegemony and the overarching government that runs the universe by destroying humanity. So the Consul was Siri and Marin's grandchild, I'm pretty sure. So he is actually the spy that at the start the hegemony warns him to look out for. Not really an unexpected twist. I kind of assumed it was him for some reason, but it was interesting on why it was. I mean, this is a lot of stuff, and there's even more I didn't talk about in this book, but I will say I did not appreciate and like how the damn book ends on a cliffhanger. What the fuck is that? I know there are, 3 more books, but seriously, a cliffhanger? Give me a break. Drives me crazy. Anyway, will I read the second one? Yeah, I want to know, so of course I will, but still, not amused. Overall, I really enjoyed the book. It wasn't my favorite book of the year, but I do plan on reading the rest of them, or at least the second, and I'm going to end with some cool quotes from the book. Tonight I listened to the city breathe and cannot help but give it the flayed face of a murdered man. Super cool description. Sarai had studied off-world for 2 years at the University of New Leon on Denob Drive, but she was homesick there. The sunsets were abrupt, the much-vaunted mountains slicing off the sunlight like a ragged scythe, and she longed for the hours-long sunsets of home where Bernard's star hung on the horizon like a great tethered red balloon while the sky congealed to evening. She missed the perfect flatness where, peering from her third-floor room under the steep gables, a little girl could look 50 kilometers across tasseled fields to watch a storm approach like a bruised black curtain lit within by lightning bolts. I thought that was a really beautiful description. There are some really nice lines in this book. Like, this book is such a joy to read because it's so well written. You can tell that the author, appreciates a good turn of phrase and a prose that is just as much about metaphor and description and interesting descriptions than just like providing you with a setting. And he doesn't belabor it either. Like, that's probably one of the longest passages of description in the book. He's so good at he's a great writer. He's just a great writer. Sari had treasured every stage of Rachel's childhood, enjoying the day-to-day normalcy of things, a normalcy which she quietly accepted as the best of life. She had always felt that the essence of human experience lay not primarily in the peak experiences, the wedding days and triumphs which stood out in the memory like dates circled in red on old calendars, but rather in the unself-conscious flow of little things, the weekend afternoon with each member of the family engaged in his or her own pursuit, their crossings and connections casual, dialogues intermittently forgettable, but the sum of such hours creating a synergy which was important and eternal. I'm gonna tear up. But no, seriously, that is something for sure. Like, sometimes the nicest things in life really are just when you're at home and, I'm reading and my partner's tinkering in the garage on some project and my infant is napping and my other one is, doing a little craft. She loves to paint. So I just, I can't wait for the days when they're a little bit older, I can kind of if I want to bake something and, I can wander in and see what they're doing and they're both playing together. Like, that's kind of the things I remember as a child enjoying with my sisters. And so I just think this book is so good at making a far-flung future relatable, and I just think that's one of the things that people probably enjoy about it. It's got so much there for everybody to kind of enjoy. And I'm going to list off my favorite quote again of all time. Metal teeth click shut in a steel vagina, missing his glands by a moist millimeter. Come on, you love that. You love that line. You love it. It's amazing. It's amazing. I should put it on my tombstone. Thanks for watching.